It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruelest part. Betrayal rarely announces itself with a warning. It arrives quietly, dressed as normal conversation, familiar laughter, promises you've heard 100 times before. And on that day, he believed every word because he had no reason not to. He had always been the dependable one. The listener. The fixer. When others stumbled, he steadied them. When they doubted themselves, he reminded them of their worth. Loyalty wasn't something he talked about, it was something he lived. He showed up when it was inconvenient, stayed when it was uncomfortable, and gave even when it cost him. So when the cracks began to show, he blamed himself for noticing them. The room was full, yet something felt wrong. Conversation stopped when he entered. Smiles arrived a second too late. His name floated through whispers that ended abruptly. He told himself it was stress, misunderstandings, overthinking. After all, these were people he trusted. People who had promised they wouldn't leave. Then came the moment everything collapsed. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a decision made without him about him. He heard the truth from someone who couldn't carry the guilt anymore. They said it was easier this way. They said you wouldn't understand. They said you were holding them back. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. Holding them back. He remembered the nights he stayed awake helping them plan their future. The times he defended them when others criticized. The sacrifices he made quietly, never expecting applause, only honesty. And now, those same people had rewritten the story, casting him as the obstacle. By the time he reached out, it was already over. Messages went unanswered. Calls rang until silence took over. And when responses finally came, they were cold, rehearsed, distant, like reading lines from a script written by someone else. We need space. This is for the best. I hope you understand. Understand what? That loyalty was disposable? That years of trust could be erased by convenience? The worst pain wasn't being left behind. It was realizing they had already moved on together while he was still trying to make sense of the fall. That night, he sat alone in a room that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The walls didn't change, but everything else did. The laughter that once lived there was gone. The future he imagined had quietly evaporated. He replayed every memory, searching for the moment he should have known. The moment he missed the truth. Sleep refused to come. Instead, doubt arrived. Maybe I trusted too much. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe this is my fault. His chest tightened with a question he didn't want to ask but couldn't avoid. If the people I gave everything to could walk away so easily, what does that say about me? Hours passed like years. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars drove by. Lights turned on and off in distant windows. Somewhere, people were laughing, planning, living. But inside that room, time stood still. Pain had pressed pause on everything he thought he knew. Just before dawn, when exhaustion finally dulled the sharpest edges of his thoughts, a heavier realization settled in, quiet, undeniable, and terrifying. No one was coming to fix this. No apology was on the way. No explanation would heal what had been broken. No rescue would arrive to restore the version of life he lost. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be truly alone, not physically, but emotionally. Abandoned by the very people who once felt like home. Tears didn't fall dramatically. They came slowly, silently, like grief finally accepting the truth. And in that silence, something else appeared, not hope yet, not strength, but awareness. This pain wasn't temporary discomfort. It was a turning point. He didn't know how, or when, or even if he would recover. All he knew was this: the life he lived yesterday was gone. And whatever came next would have to be built from the ruins they left behind. As the sun rose, casting light across a face marked by exhaustion and heartbreak, He wiped his eyes and whispered words he barely believed. I won't let this be the end. He didn't feel strong. He didn't feel brave. He felt shattered. But sometimes, the moment everything falls apart, is the moment something else quietly begins. The days after the fall blurred together. Morning arrived whether he was ready or not. Light crept through the window, landing on a room that felt heavier than it used to. He would lie there for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, forgetting just briefly what had happened. Then memory returned, sharp and unforgiving, pressing down on his chest like weight he couldn't lift. Silence became the loudest thing in his life. No messages buzzing on his phone. No familiar voices checking in. No one asking if he was okay. At first, he kept the phone close, as if proximity might summon a miracle. He checked it more than he cared to admit. Every vibration from another app sparked hope that died almost instantly. They were really gone. He tried distracting himself. Long walks with nowhere to go. Music playing just to fill the air. Even noise couldn't drown out the questions echoing inside him. His mind replayed conversations he wished he could rewrite. Words he should have said. Signs he should have seen. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? How did I become so easy to leave? At night, the thoughts grew louder. The world was quieter then, giving pain room to speak freely. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams where everything was normal again only to end with the same familiar loss. Waking up hurt more than staying awake. He learned quickly that heartbreak wasn't just emotional. It lived in the body. In the heaviness of his limbs. In the tightness of his chest. In the exhaustion that sleep never seemed to fix. And yet, the world kept moving. People laughed in cafes. Plans were made. Success stories were shared. It felt unfair, almost insulting, that life could continue so casually when his head cracked open. He began to feel invisible, like his pain existed in a separate universe no one else could see. But silence does something strange when it lasts long enough. At first, it torments you. Then it teaches you. Without constant voices telling him who he was forced to listen to himself. There were no distractions left, no reassurance, no validation, no escape. Just long stretches of quiet and the truth he'd been avoiding. He had built his worth on being needed. Being the reliable one. The supportive one. The one who stayed. And when that role was taken away, he felt empty, like a house stripped of furniture, unsure what purpose it still served. That realization hurt almost as much as the betrayal. One evening, while sitting alone in the dim light of his room, he caught his reflection in the darkened window. Tired eyes. Slumped shoulders. A version of himself he barely recognized. For the first time since everything fell apart, anger surfaced, not at them, but at himself. Not rage. Resolve. I can't keep living like this, he said aloud, testing the weight of the words. No dramatic plan formed. No sudden confidence rushed in. Just a quiet understanding, staying here emotionally frozen, waiting for people who had already chosen to leave would destroy him. So he made a decision. Not a loud one. Not a public one. A private promise. He stopped reaching out. Stopped checking for messages that would never come. Stopped explaining his absence to people who hadn't asked. Instead, he started sitting with the discomfort. Letting it exist without running from it. He allowed himself to feel the pain fully, without trying to rush healing or pretend he was fine. Some days, progress meant nothing more than getting out of bed. Other days, it meant writing thoughts he'd never say out loud. And on the hardest days, it meant simply surviving. But something subtle began to shift. The silence that once screamed now whispered. The loneliness that once crushed him began to create space to breathe, to think, to see. He noticed how often he had abandoned himself trying to keep others close. How many boundaries he ignored. How often he chose loyalty over self-respect. These weren't comfortable truths. But they were honest ones. Late one night, as rain tapped softly against the window, he realized something that changed the way he saw everything. Being left behind didn't mean he was unworthy. It meant he had outgrown the place they were trying to keep him in. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the pain. Not happiness. Not confidence. Possibility. He didn't announce his intentions. He didn't seek approval. He didn't tell anyone what he was about to do. But in the quiet, when no one was watching, he chose himself. And that choice, small, unseen, and easily overlooked, was the moment his life truly began to change. No one noticed when he disappeared. That was the first truth he had to accept. The world didn't pause to ask where he went. No one came looking for explanations. Life simply adjusted around his absence, as if he had always been optional. At first, that realization stung. Then, strangely, it set him free. If no one was watching, he could rebuild without pressure. He started small. Almost unnoticeably. Waking up earlier than he needed to. Cleaning his space as if order outside might bring clarity inside. Writing lists that only he would ever see. They weren't ambitious plans, just simple commitments. Drink water. Move your body. Finish what you start. There were no dramatic transformations. No instant confidence. Some days, the old heaviness returned without warning, clinging to him like fog. But instead of fighting it, he learned to move with it. Discipline, he discovered, wasn't loud motivation. It was showing up even when nothing felt rewarding. Especially then. While others shared highlight reels of their lives, he worked in silence. No updates. No announcements. Progress became private. He learned to measure success differently, not by applause, but by consistency. Each morning he chose effort over excuses. Each night he chose reflection over regret. The pain didn't disappear. It evolved. What once felt like an open wound slowly hardened into armor. The memories that used to weaken him began to sharpen his focus. Betrayal became fuel. Loneliness became time. And time, used correctly, became power. He began learning things he had always postponed. Skills he once believed he was too late to master. Knowledge he had been afraid to pursue because failure felt too risky when people were watching. Now, with no audience, fear lost its grip. Failure became feedback. Some nights, exhaustion crept in, whispering that none of this mattered. That they would never see his growth. That success without recognition was pointless. On those nights, he reminded himself why he started. Not to prove them wrong. But to prove himself right. He wasn't building a version of himself for their approval. He was building a life he could respect when no one else was around. Slowly, subtly, his posture changed. His voice steadied. His eyes held less desperation and more intention. These weren't things he noticed immediately, but others would, later. The most surprising change wasn't external. It was how quiet his mind became. The constant replaying of the past softened. Thoughts that once chased each other in circles now lined up with purpose. He learned to sit in silence without feeling empty. To be alone without feeling abandoned. For the first time, solitude felt like strength. Weeks turned into months. Effort stacked on effort. Habits formed. Confidence grew, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the calm kind that doesn't need validation. He no longer checked who was watching. He no longer wondered who cared. He cared. And then, something unexpected happened. Opportunities began to appear. Not miracles. Not shortcuts. Just doors, small ones at first. Chances that required courage to step through. Moments that tested whether he truly believed in the version of himself he was becoming. He said yes when fear told him to stay quiet. He showed up when doubt suggested he wasn't ready. And each time he acted, the gap between who he was and who he wanted to be grew smaller. Somewhere along the way, the people who once left him behind started to hear his name again. Not from him but from others. Whispers of progress. Hints of success. Stories that didn't match the version of him they had walked away from. He didn't notice at first. He was too busy building. But one evening, scrolling absent-mindedly, he saw a familiar name reacting to something he had created. A message left unread. Curiosity tugged at him, but he didn't open it. Not yet. Because the truth was this. The work wasn't finished. And the strongest version of him hadn't arrived. He had learned something powerful in the shadows. That growth doesn't need an audience. That healing isn't loud. And that sometimes, the greatest transformations happen where no one is clapping. He closed the app. Returned to his work. And smiled not because life was easy, but because it was his. Unseen. Underrated. Unstoppable. They didn't recognize him at first. Not in person, not online, not even in passing mentions. The man they thought they knew, the one they had abandoned, was gone. In his place stood someone deliberate, composed, and quietly powerful. The same people who had walked away without a second thought now found themselves hearing whispers. Not from him. From the world around him. Did you see what he's doing? He's moving faster than we expected. Where did this come from? Every mention was a small sting, proof that he had not just survived, but thrived. And it wasn't flashy. It wasn't desperate for attention. It was simply undeniable. They tried to dismiss it at first. Luck, they said. Timing. But luck and timing can't account for months of unseen effort, nights of discipline, mornings spent building habits, afternoons spent learning, and years of resilience stacked quietly behind the scenes. They remembered the nights they mocked him. The times they whispered that he would never amount to anything. The promises they had broken without a second thought. And now, as they scrolled through updates, notices, and stories of growth, a bitter truth hit them: they had underestimated him. He didn't reach out to confront them. He didn't post for attention. He didn't send messages reminding them of the pain they caused. Instead, he stayed focused on the life he had rebuilt. That was the brilliance of it. Because true success isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you can rise quietly, persistently, and without asking for permission. At first, they tried subtlety. A casual comment, a half-hearted check-in. But even those attempts felt awkward, hollow, and meaningless. He didn't respond. Not out of malice, but because his energy had no room for people who had chosen to leave. Slowly, the realization set in: they had lost more than they had ever thought. Opportunities they had tried to withhold from him had been claimed, not by luck, but by consistent effort. Respect they thought they controlled could not be demanded, it had to be earned. And now, they watched someone they abandoned command it effortlessly. One evening, as he walked past a familiar place where he once lingered with them, their eyes met. Recognition flickered, followed by hesitation. He noticed. But he didn't pause. Because he had learned a truth deeper than their regret. The moment someone truly leaves you behind, they don't just risk losing you, they risk losing the version of you they never understood. That knowledge gave him freedom. They expected anger. They expected confrontation. Perhaps even tears. What they found instead was calm. Confidence. Peace. And the sting of regret? It was theirs alone. He had chosen growth over resentment. Discipline over distraction. Focus over approval. And in doing so, he had created a life that didn't need validation from those who had walked away. That evening, as he returned home, he realized something powerful: their departure had been a gift, in a way they never could have imagined. Without their betrayal, he may have never discovered his own strength. Without being left behind, he may have never built the version of himself that now moved with quiet authority and unwavering purpose. They were still stuck in the past, replaying their mistakes. He was living in the present, building the future they could no longer touch. And that, perhaps more than anything, was the ultimate revenge. But he didn't call it revenge. He called it freedom. The world waited for a confrontation. For the anger. For the tears. But he didn't give them what they expected. Hope had rewritten the rules. He had survived betrayal, abandonment, and heartbreak. He had faced silence and solitude. He had built himself in the shadows, without applause or recognition. And now, he understood something no one who left him could see: their choices could not define him, only his own actions could. When they reached out, it wasn't out of genuine care. It was curiosity. A desire to measure what they had lost. And he saw it clearly. The people who once laughed at him, dismissed him, and walked away were looking for validation of their own choices. He smiled, quietly. Not smugly. Not arrogantly. Just a calm, unwavering smile. Because he had already won, not by taking from them, but by giving to himself. He had reclaimed his peace, rebuilt his confidence, and cultivated a life that no betrayal could touch. And the most beautiful part? He didn't need them to see it to feel it. Forgiveness came first. Not for them. Not for their sake. But for his own. He forgave not because what they did was okay, but because he refused to carry their weight any longer. He refused to let bitterness decide the story of his life. And in forgiving, he discovered something unexpected: freedom. With freedom came clarity. He could pursue what truly mattered, without fear of judgment, without waiting for approval, without measuring his worth against anyone else. His dreams, once postponed and silenced, now demanded attention. His potential, once questioned, now commanded action. And every day, he took a step closer to becoming the person he had always been capable of being. Some people never understood what happened to him. Some assumed his success was luck, timing, or chance. But he knew the truth. It was built on nights spent alone with his thoughts, mornings spent pushing past pain, and months of unseen, relentless effort. He had transformed. Not for them. Not to prove them wrong. But because he finally understood that his life was his responsibility and his to create. And when they realized it, too late, they could only watch. The irony was almost poetic. The very people who had abandoned him now envied him, not because of fame or wealth, but because of something far greater: resilience, self-respect, and unshakable hope. It was hope that had carried him through the darkest moments. Hope that had guided him when the world seemed silent. Hope that had quietly rewritten the ending they never expected. He remembered the first night he realized he was truly alone, wondering if anyone would ever come for him. He remembered the tears, the doubt, the weight of betrayal pressing down on his chest. He remembered thinking the world had turned its back and that he was powerless. And yet here he was, standing taller, moving with purpose, living fully, and embracing a peace they could never take from him. He had survived the impossible. He had turned pain into strength, betrayal into wisdom, and abandonment into freedom. And in the end, he understood the most profound lesson of all. Some endings aren't written by those who leave you behind. They are written by those who refuse to give up on themselves. Hope had done more than rewrite his story. It had given him the life he deserved. And as he looked forward, unafraid, unburdened, and unstoppable, he smiled once more. Not because he had conquered them, but because he had conquered himself.